On today's episode of Reasonable Coder, we ask, what is the best programming language? Which language or languages will we cover on this show? What is an IDE? And then we'll write our first line of code. Hello world! Welcome to Reasonable Coder. I'm your host, Terry Murray. In our last video, we asked the question, what is the fastest way to learn to program? And today we ask, what is the best programming language? Well, the answer is Visual Basic 6. Funny, right? Interestingly, in the Stack Overflow 2017 Annual Developer Survey, which surveyed around 64,000 developers, Visual Basic 6 was the most dreaded language. 64,000 is a pretty large number, so we're going to use the results of that survey to help us answer several of today's questions. There's also a link to that survey in the description. So back to the best programming language. For beginner concepts, most languages are fine. Then once you learn the basics, it's easy to pick up additional languages as you need to. And that's good because a very famous programmer, Bjarne Stroustrup, the creator of C++, says that nobody should call themselves a professional if they only know one programming language. But again, we have to start somewhere. If you asked a sample of professionals what is the best programming language, you're probably going to hear either there is no best language, or it depends on what you want to do. You might even hear the wisdom, the best language is the one you know. I think that each of these has two things in common. The answer is not wrong, and also it doesn't tell you anything. And I think we can do better. First, we should make clear that learning a programming language is not the goal of this show. Our goal is to teach how to build software systems. However, we need one primary programming language to help us start, and it would be nice if our first language helped us with most of our needs. So, what are our needs? To be as versatile as possible, we need a language that is multi-platform, Linux, Mac, Windows, web. We want something that is memory managed, statically typed, general purpose. If you don't understand what some of these things mean, well, we'll talk about those later. Don't worry about them now. And also we want a language that's able to do mobile and gaming. So our new question is, what is the best programming language for our needs? So let's throw up the 20 most popular languages according to the Stack Overflow survey. Now, if you are a specialist, the best programming language question is already easy for you. If you're doing statistical programming, you want to try R. And if you're doing mathematics programming, you want to try MATLAB. If you're programming for Microsoft Office, you want to use VBA. And if you're working only with databases, like directly with databases, you're going to want to learn how to program in SQL. The rest are general purpose programming languages. So let's move down through our requirements list. On the multi-platform front, we lose Swift and Objective-C. Those are primarily intended for iOS and macOS. Requiring memory management, we lose older languages, C, C++, and assembly. And requiring static typing, we lose a bunch. We remove JavaScript, Python, PHP, Ruby, and Perl. Those are all dynamic typed languages. Ignoring the things in the bottom of the list and focusing on only the top, we have two remaining competing languages, Java and C#. To choose between those, we're going to look at three things. We're going to look at mobile, gaming, and love. On the mobile front, C# can be used for programming on iOS, Android, and Windows right out of the box, and Java mostly centers on Android development. And for gaming, most popular games to date have been coded in C and C++ if they're larger or especially older games. However, there is a gaming engine, Unity, that's gained a lot of ground recently, being used for bigger games, and under the hood, that uses C#. And for love, if we throw up the Stack Overflow survey of developers again, it showed that while 51% of Java programmers loved Java, 62% of C# programmers loved C#. And that's a minor thing, but it's a fun point. So the answer to the question for us, what is the best programming language for our needs? C#. Now that we've selected C#, you may be wondering what the question number 2 is about. what language or languages are we going to be learning in this video series. Now finally we have an easy question to answer. I'm going to say a bunch of programming words again, so like before, if you don't recognize the things that I'm saying, don't worry, we'll get into everything in more detail later. But for interacting with relational databases, we're going to need SQL. For web front end, we could go with either JavaScript or TypeScript, but because TypeScript is statically typed, it's much more like C#, and so we'll stick to that, and it'll be easier to move back and forth between the two. We'll also be working with HTML and CSS, because those are the placement, layout, and styling languages of web pages. And if you're working with the web, those are more or less unavoidable. And we'll talk a bunch about all of those things in more detail later. Question 3, what is an IDE and do we need one? IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, which is just a fancy term for a text editor for code that also allows you to build the code, execute the code, and it helps you find bugs. So all of the things that a programmer would need in a text editor. The most popular IDE for C# has always been Visual Studio.net, and for the past several years, Visual Studio has actually been the most popular IDE in the world. And we'll be using the free version, Visual Studio Community Edition. So there are both Windows and Mac versions of Visual Studio.net. So regardless of what I would prefer, I think the best thing to do is to figure out what most of you guys are probably using from an operating system standpoint, and we will use that. So how do we find out? To the survey. Survey says most used platform, Windows. Okay, the community has spoken, Windows it is. Great, so let's install it. So first we'll open up a browser and we'll do a search for Visual Studio Community Download. Usually the first hit is the one that we want. Click the Download VS Community button. No thanks. And then we'll execute the file. The installation is fairly straightforward. For the most part, we're going to want to just do whatever it asks us to do, but there will be a few things we're going to want to change with the configuration of what's being installed. The first thing, we're going to want to select some additional components like ASP.NET Web Development, also mobile development with .NET, and finally we're going to want to stick to .NET Core because that's the cross-platform version. A couple of additional components we're going to need for our code repo is Git for Windows and GitHub extension for Visual Studio. Those are going to be important to us because that's where we'll be storing our code. While we're waiting for the install to happen, we're going to grab the newest copy of .NET Core 2.0. So we'll do another search for that. We'll click the download link. And now we're going to grab the whatever version is specific to your operating system, x86 or x64. For me, that's the x64 exe installer. And I won't start that install yet until the Visual Studio install finishes. So we'll just speed that up a bit here. There we go. Now we can start the .NET SDK 2.0 install. Now we'll close the browser, we don't need that any longer, and we will launch Visual Studio. The first thing we'll get prompted with is whether we want to log in to the Microsoft Developer Network with our Microsoft credentials. And you can do that now if you want, but I'm going to click Not Now, maybe later. Now we have the option to pick a theme, and I'm going to pick the dark theme, and we'll talk more about why in the pro tip section today. Once Visual Studio launches, the first thing I'm going to do is pin it to the taskbar. That'll make it easier to get to later. And now click Create New Project. Now we're going to click the .NET Core section. Most everything we are going to develop is going to be in here because that's the stuff we know is cross-platform. And we're going to pick a console app. Later we'll move to different types of apps, but the console app is where we'll start. So I'll name this To Do and click OK. Interestingly, we don't have to do a Hello World application, which is usually what people start with, because a console app in 2017 just automatically has a working Hello World application. So the first thing that we can do is click the Run button at the top here, and we'll execute the program. But we don't get to see anything, because the program executed, printed Hello World, and then stopped. So we're going to add another line under this to make it slow down. We're going to type console.readkey, and you don't have to understand that for now, but what it basically means is when the system runs, it's going to wait for us to hit a key before it does anything else. So now we'll hit run again, and there it is, Hello World. So we can stop that. And we'll change the text here just so that we know that the system is executing the program that we made. So I'll just change some of the lettering and we'll run again. And there it is as we changed it. We can also do things here like math if we want, because we're running code, so it's not simply spitting out strings. So if we make a new line here and type console.writeLine again, and then we can put some numbers in here and add them together. And we'll see that instead of printing exactly what we have there, C# will do the math for us and print out the result, 21. We could also make that fancy and put in an extra set of parentheses and do like order of operation. So now it'll do the multiplication first and then the addition second, or the addition first and the multiplication second. And then we get Hello World, meaning of life. Pro tip. So in most text editors and IDEs nowadays, you have the option to modify the theme that you were using. The theme has to do with the colors and whether the background is generally a dark color or a bright color or white or anything you want really. Two of the most popular options are a white background with dark text or a dark background with light text. Studies show that people find it easier to read dark text on a white background, but there's more to the story than that. It's also harder on the eyes when you use a white background with dark text, unless you're moving back and forth between a screen and a piece of paper or a screen and a whiteboard, in which case you're going to want to stick to the same kind of thing. If your whiteboard is white and your paper is white with dark text, you're probably going to want the same thing on your screen. But if you're a coder or you're going to spend a lot of time in front of a computer coding, then you're probably going to want to pick a dark background with light colored text because it's easier on your eyes and there's less strain there, and hey, it looks cooler. Thanks for watching. If you want to be notified of when the next video comes out, please consider subscribing. In the next video, we'll tackle the question, what are the most used programming concepts and how fast can I learn them? You'll see me then.